it's awesome to know that, yeah, you can really invest yourself and make a crazy transition in 2 months, go from personal training to tech sales at a company like Snowflake.
It's really rare to have a chance to sit down and talk to someone who has broken into one of the best tech companies in the world and learn all about that process. And it's why I'm really excited today to speak with Merrill, who after being a personal trainer for 7 years, recently broke into Snowflake, one of the best tech companies in the world. Merrill's not only going to talk about his experience transitioning from a totally different career into tech sales, but also the really in-depth process, what it looked like to break into one of the best companies in the world. And I hope you get a lot out of today's conversation. Well, hey everyone, really excited this week to speak with Merrill, who is one of our recent graduates that got a job at Snowflake, arguably one of the hottest tech companies to work at right now. Certainly really excited for you, Merrill. And as we kind of get into it, I know one of the reasons I'm excited to talk to you, not only for your experience at Snowflake, but also your background. I know you kind of have elements of your background that are more traditional, some that are, you kind of took your own path. So maybe let's start there kind of from the beginning, right? Paint the picture of where you were kind of leading up to deciding to transition into tech sales and paint the picture for everyone watching.
Yeah, so it definitely was a unique journey. I started out in tech in school. My degree is in mechanical engineering. I just knew that wasn't really, it didn't feel right while I was in school, but I still got the degree. Afterwards, or during while I was in school, I did go through a cool fitness transformation, and I kind of dove headfirst into that. And I did that for about 8 to 9-ish years before I started moving into the more sales side of things. And I really climbed that vertical as best as I could. And it got to a point where I felt like I wasn't going to be able to grow much more without making some sort of crazy transition. And then, I started to come across just looking into what can I do to combine the background that I have and the sales that I'm doing right now, B2C, and maybe a little bit of the engineering. And your YouTube videos started to pop up, and I just started watching them and seeing the success stories of other people made me think like, man, maybe this is something I could do too. And the more I watched, the more excited I got. And one day I just pulled the trigger, and 2 months later, here I am, 3 days into Snowflake and loving it.
Yeah. No, man, it's exciting to see. And I know you really dove like head first the second you made your mind up on tech sales. You really went there and just went all in. And maybe as a starting point too, like I'd love to pick your brain on why tech sales as a whole, right? I'm sure you were probably searching different careers, but how'd you land on tech sales?
It seemed like a vertical that when you master it, there's a lot of opportunities in so many different directions, and your potential upward trajectory, it's going to be limited to whatever you're willing to put the work into. There's just so much opportunity. And it seemed like it was going to be a really hard space to break into, but that once you're there, like it's really up to you. Like you could take your career as far as you want to go. And that's even something we were talking about at work today. Like, you're an SDR right now, but you could go into ABM, you could go into CS, you could go into so many different opportunities, but this is a great place to start. And that's one of the things you called out pretty frequently, actually. There's boot camps that say you can start as a sales engineer or start as an account executive, and you're like, you got to put the groundwork in, find a good place to start. And that's what really resonated with me. And that's why I think I chose tech sales, was that, it seems like the ultimate cap on what you could earn or what you could do is there's so many options that I knew I could start here and figure that out as I went.
Yeah. And you decide on tech sales, right? So maybe paint that picture of kind of how you evolved to ultimately ending up with our course. Prior to that, did you try applying on your own? How did you kind of go about really starting to say like, okay, I'm going to do this? What was like maybe step 1 and 2?
Yeah, it was a couple different steps mentally whenever I was really letting go of the career path that I was on, because ultimately I had some private investors who were willing to support me in acquiring my own gym. That was basically to be my next step. And I did a whole bunch of research into that route, and that just seemed like it was going to be a lot more complicated and not necessarily as it wasn't going to lead to the long-term growth that I wanted still. It was just going to be a little bit more of the same. And ultimately I felt like I was kind of stuck. Whenever it came to, I think just what stood out to me about tech sales was specifically working in the data vertical is I'm going to be working with companies all across the spectrum, learning skills and learning aspects of so many different industries that I'm somebody who, I'm still growing. I like to consider myself young in my career, I want to make sure that I'm setting myself up for future success so I can avoid the problem that I was in just a year or two ago, where I felt like I kind of had capped myself off, and tech just seems like the obvious win there. As far as other things that I looked into before going into this, I sales as a whole just seemed like a great potential career path, but there's so much, I don't want to say stigma, but there's a lot of different cultures in different sales spaces. And tech sales seem to like have a culture that was something that I just felt more drawn to. It seems like it's culture built around that research driven prospecting, that problem solving background that appealed to me more so, I think, in my engineering background, and leveraging those skills in your sales career. It felt different whenever I initially looked into it. And that's, I think, what drew me deeper into it.
No, that's awesome, man. Yeah, and then kudos again on just like your grit and consistency throughout the entire process. I mean, I always knew you were going to end up somewhere really good. And I was even very impressed when you landed up at Snowflake. It was expected once you got in there, but again, like I'd be curious to hear like the entire story, because I think a lot of folks out there would get a lot of value out of it. Could you sort of paint the picture of that process? Like what happened, how did it go down? Yeah, just walk us through that entire thing.
Yeah. So whenever I got that initial email back from my new boss about scheduling a meeting, I was like, this is one of the companies that I you guys suggest, create a list of companies that you'd like to work for that are in your area, and that was one of them. Got really excited. Had my, there was a lot of steps to the process, but we're interviewing with a lot of companies throughout the process. There's all this conversation in the background about the tech space and how well it's doing over the last quarter. It seems like there was kind of a negative trend, at least publicly in the media, and so I was still pursuing all of the other companies that I was interviewing with, but I was really excited about the Snowflake opportunity. I went through 2 SDR manager interviews, doing mock calls in those. Felt like I did really well. But my manager, he told me at the time, he was kind of on the fence about me at that moment. And I had another company that had pushed me through like as quick as possible. And there was like 6 or 7 steps in there. I think an IQ test, as well as a personality test, just a whole bunch of different things. It's interesting seeing how all these companies kind of approach the process. So I tried to expedite the process with Snowflake. I asked Matt, hey, like, you guys are a company that I really want to be with. Is there any way that we can move to the next step, which I believe would be a presentation? And Matt just let me know at the time. He said, yeah, I just, it sounds like you found something that's going to work well for you. This isn't a no, but it's a no. And I was able to reach out to you, Chris. You were able to kind of help guide me on like, how do I communicate my desire to get myself back in the door with them? I'll actually pause on that. I continued to pursue that other opportunity that had pushed me through so far. Tried negotiating with them. They had been pretty open about being able to negotiate at the start of the interview process, and then just really weren't willing to make any concessions. And the opportunity, ultimately, it was a good company, high NPS score, high Glassdoor score, but the OTE was going to be low. It was going to be 3 months of ramping before I could meet quota, and then quota was paid out quarterly. So it was gonna be 6 months before I could make any sort of commission. So it was something that it just didn't feel right. And I was able to reach back out to you, Chris, and you helped me kind of figure out, okay, how do I communicate with Matt that like, I really want to be a part of this process? And Matt really loved the email that we crafted and gave me another opportunity to get back into it. Next step was a presentation that I had to do on a company, Nike specifically. We had to do a presentation about what are their fiscal initiatives, how can data be helpful in that, and then how can Snowflake specifically be helpful for driving those initiatives. And that was about an hour-long process. It was a 30-minute presentation, another mock call with a third SDR manager, and then the next day I had one more final, just a gut check interview with the VP of the Northeast region. And so that was just a long, probably like a 4 or 5 week process in the end. but getting that final call or getting that green light, you guys give a ton of great suggestions on questions. Everybody, that's one thing. If I could recommend anybody watching this is with the questions, like take those to heart. I think those leave a big impact on everybody that you're interviewing with. And especially that final question is like, based on everything you've seen here today, is there any concerns that you have about, moving us forward in this next steps in the process? Like that question helped me know kind of exactly where I was at the end of each call. And when I asked the VP that in our final meeting, he said, I have no reservations. I'm going to give you the green light. I was like, yes. And got the offer later that night and just was like on cloud nine.
That's awesome, man. No, I'm stoked for you. And again, super well deserved. And good to hear that the interview questions definitely helped out. We definitely took a lot of time to craft those in and went through a lot of trial and error ourselves. So, that's kind of like the results of us going in and out through the motion and everything else. I'm curious, like, how did you prepare for all these different interviews? Like, what did you do to kind of, because you obviously like crushed it, right? You came back in, you obviously like were a standout candidate. What did you do to prepare? Like you had a 1-hour presentation. Can you kind of walk us through what you did there?
Yeah, for the 1-hour presentation, that was tough. I actually reached out to some of I got some extra feedback from Matt. I asked him for some clarifying questions, but I didn't want to, seem like I needed too much hand holding. So I used LinkedIn and just like, prospecting for managers to get meetings with, I reached out to some of the people who had just joined Snowflake. And I got some helpful feedback from people there who I'm on their team as to kind of what to do. You guys gave me some great insights into what the presentation might look like in the sense, or what they're really looking for with this, looking at the company's 10Ks and figuring out just the financial goals from that is kind of a really easy way to approach setting yourself up for the presentation. And then just, I think for me, where I excelled specifically with Snowflake is I really immersed myself. Once I was at this point in the process, I really immersed myself in the product and tried to understand it as well as I could, so that whenever I was in the presentation component, I was able to be a little bit more natural and a little bit more genuine. I think that's something that all the interviews I was doing, they were looking for kind of how, or at least it felt like they were looking for how people manage themselves in normal interactions. And then one of the big things that I know stood out, and I always got props for kudos for whenever I did it, was if there was a coachable moment, was taking that feedback and asking if I could go again. I did that during the presentation. I had after my 30-minute presentation, I had to do another mock call with an SDR manager who was real tough on me. But just wanted to test me. I mean, that's important. It's Snowflake. They want to make sure they've got people who can handle no with nothing to go on. And so she gave me some feedback, and I just I jumped the gun. I asked, can I go again? And I think that won me some bonus points. So things like that, just show that you're willing to take the coaching, that you're willing to work on yourself, because it's an entry-level position, truly. They know you're not going to come in there and just have mastered cold calls or cold outreach or whatever it is that they're going to be tasking you with, but they want to see if you're coachable and how you can handle rejection. And if you can do both of those things well, you're going to be successful.
Yeah, no doubt. And, it's funny, like hearing that, and maybe just something we were talking offline about before this, right? Which is, it really took you end to end from when you started Tech Sales Ascension to breaking in at Snowflake. It was 8 weeks. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but you said it kind of felt like an eternity. Could you speak to just kind of the overall mentality? Because again, you got after it, you had tons of interviews, but obviously it is, like, candidly, it can be stressful at times. I'd love to get your take on what it was like for you.
Yeah. So that was one of the things that, like, while I was in it, it really felt like it was taking so long. But once I finished and I looked back at it, I was like, when did I actually pull up my email? It's like, it's only been 8 weeks. And it's like I was saying, if you're doing things well, like if you're doing the reach outs, if you've set up your resume correctly, if you're applying with the frequency that you should be applying, you should be getting a lot of follow-ups and you should be getting a lot of interviews. And it's important to pause and recognize where you're at throughout the process and just take each step as it comes, and not really. I think what would have helped me at the time is if I didn't, with each company, like I said, with the Snowflake presentation, once I got to that point, I really immersed myself. I was immersing myself in each of these companies a lot as I was going through the process. So I think that was a really part of what made it feel like it took so long, was that I was focusing so much more on each company, what they do, a little too early on in the process. And that's, again, the role. I mean, it's important. We talk about this at work right now. Like my new boss, he's been there for a few months, and we did some mock calls today, and he was able to kind of, he knows the product well enough, but he didn't have to use any technical knowledge on the product to move to getting a meeting, which is the whole point of what you're going to be doing. So I think if I could go back and do it differently, I would make sure that I'm practicing those skills and I'm focusing on those aspects of whatever stage I'm at in the interview process, to make sure that it doesn't feel like too much, but also just recognize, like, if you're in that process, if you're getting the interviews, like, I knew I was going to get somewhere. I wanted it to be somewhere awesome like Snowflake. But I had that faith, and you guys were very helpful, coaching me throughout, giving me feedback, and kind of telling me at times, like, there were opportunities that came up that I was ready. I just wanted to make the transition. You were like, maybe not that one. Just because, there are great opportunities out there. And if you're putting the work in, you're going to find one and you're going to connect with them.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the big thing. I think especially right now with the entire economy being in, I wouldn't say shambles necessarily, but it's definitely not what it used to be like a year or two ago. I think a lot of people are very lenient to take the first offer that they get. So like, I was very proud of you for one, like understanding that you were good enough to actually land at one of the best companies in the world and one of the best sales organizations. But I also want to take a step back, because I am curious, like, you're obviously a very, very smart guy. Like, you're very bright. I have no doubt in my mind that you could do this on your own. Obviously, like, maybe our training helped you get there much faster, but was there a point in time where you were like, all right, like, it makes sense now for me to invest in training? Or what kind of led to that in the first place? Like, why'd you decide to go with higher levels?
Yeah, I think the main reason I decided to sign up for the program, truthfully, was the success stories that you kept sharing, that I kept seeing, and I'm happy to finally be one of them. But I think that speaks volumes about anything, right? If you can see a product is delivering results, like, you're going to want to sign up for that product. And I appreciate you calling out, saying I'm a smart guy, and all the faith that you had in me throughout this process. But there's just stuff I don't know about this space. There's terminology. I mean, I've learned a lot of it now, but things that it's a perspective I didn't have. And it would have taken me so much longer on my own to learn what was really standing out. And you can do your research and you can get some insights, but when you go to research anything these days, there's going to be 20 different people with 20 different perspectives. And if you try them all out yourself, you might nail it and find the one that works right for you right away. But it's probably best, in my opinion, just like it was for me, before this, I think I mentioned it already, I was in fitness. I help people transform their health. And for us, the value, we have C-suite individuals who are very intelligent, have all the resources and time, but they still come to us because it's like, look, I'm going to shortcut this whole learning process for you. Here's exactly what you need to do to be successful. And that's what you guys did for me. And I think for everybody else who joins in is, here's what you really need to focus on, and here's what your expectations need to be. I think that's another important thing that I really appreciated and what resonated with me, I think, because of my own background. One of the videos you put up, like, you may get lucky and land an AE role somewhere, but you are probably not going to have the skill set to succeed like you want to. And maybe you do, maybe you don't, but you're much more likely to be super successful if you play the long game, find a great SDR role with a great company, and set yourself up for success down the road. Like, when I heard that, that's like, all right, I think these guys know what they're talking about. They keep putting up these people who are, I think it really was the Amazon driver who got into tech. And I was like, if you can do it, I have no excuses. This guy, I have sales on my resume. I have an engineering degree on my resume. I should be able to make this happen. And so you guys have helped so many people make the transition who have none of those things to kind of boast about, to be able to set themselves up for success. It was kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah. And shout out to Ezron. He actually just got promoted at Rippling, so he's crushing it. If you're out there, Ezron, we appreciate you. And no, Meryl, this was really great. And I appreciate the depth too. I know not only for anyone that's looking at some of these bigger tech companies, I know they're going to get a lot of value out of it. Certainly Snowflake specifically, I feel like you've kind of given a few secrets away, which is going to be really helpful. And I guess, you know, in closing, I'd open it up to you too, just more broadly thoughts around this entire process for anyone that's maybe considering higher levels, for anyone that's just considering tech sales as a whole. You know, any other thoughts that come to mind while we're here?
Make sure that this is something you really want to do, because once you start to invest the time into it, it's not something that I think it's going to take a lot of your time. It's going to take a lot of your energy. Make sure it's something you really want to do. It will be successful, but just like, I think I'm coming from the fitness background, like when you first start, it's going to be hard. Like you're going to feel demotivated when you start applying and there's like one response after like 100 apps and you're messaging a whole bunch of people and like no one's following up. Like it's easy to get demotivated, I think, because I went into it so excited, and then I kind of like, you know, I kept going, but it was one of those things where I was like, all right, I got to just keep kind of pushing through this initial phase. And then once I got my traction started, I felt a lot better about it. But like, know that this is going to take work, but that it's very doable. And you've just got to have faith and follow the steps in the process, and you'll be successful.
Yeah, totally. And I appreciate the transparency too. I think it's easy to get caught up in these testimonials, and, you know, we're talking about how excited we are that you're at Snowflake and you're already loving it. Day 3, been to the office, getting free lunches. But yeah, I mean, it's honestly, I think, reassuring to hear that, like, to everyone watching, you applied to tons of places, got a lot of rejection, and still got there. So
yeah. Hundreds of places. Honestly, by the end, I sent out, it was a few hundred probably applications.
Well, Meryl, this was really great. Congratulations again, man. Very excited to see where Snowflake takes you. I know you're going to pour everything into it like you did throughout this process as well. But thanks as always for your time. Looking forward to catching up soon.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate all the support throughout this process, and I'm so happy to be where I'm at.